I want you to imagine something for just a second. Think about the exact route you drive to work every single morning. Or, maybe it's just the walk you take to your local grocery store.
Right, the one you take on total autopilot.
Exactly. You know this path so intimately that you could probably navigate it with your eyes closed, right? Like you anticipate the potholes before they even appear. You know exactly which lane moves fastest at that one traffic light, and you barely even register the buildings you pass anymore.
You're just completely tuned out.
Yeah. You've essentially built this entire mental map of your city based purely on that one specific groove you've worn into the earth. But what if, on some random Tuesday, a detour forces you down a completely different road? Maybe just, I don't know, one street over from your usual route.
Oh yeah, and suddenly everything changes.
Right. Suddenly you're driving past this stunning architecture you never knew existed. You see a vibrant park, a completely different atmosphere, like a totally different community. And in that single moment of detour, your entire understanding of the city you've lived in for years is just completely shattered.
It's a really profoundly disorienting experience when that happens, because it forces you to confront a pretty uncomfortable reality. The comprehensive worldview you thought you had was actually just a tiny, hyper-specific slice of the landscape. We kind of assume our familiarity with a routine equates to a mastery of reality, and it just doesn't.
Oh, no, it totally doesn't. And that specific realization that our entire view of the world is basically dictated by the familiar roads we just happen to travel is the whole foundation of our deep dive today.
It's such a great topic.
It really is. So we're exploring a truly fascinating 2023 essay written by Feng. And the translation we're working from was edited by Yu. It's titled Different Sceneries Along Different Roads.
Yeah, and our mission today is really to take a look at how a relatively simple, 230-kilometer road trip in Canada?
Yep, 230.
How that trip became this incredibly profound philosophical lens. I mean, we're going to explore human cognition, the very real dangers of our own echo chambers, and ultimately this massive, seemingly unbridgeable divide between the material and the spiritual worlds.
It covers so much ground.
It really does. The author does something remarkable by seamlessly connecting the physical landscape of a literal road trip to the invisible mental frameworks we all subconsciously build. Like, it starts as a simple travelogue, but it very quickly becomes an invitation to examine our own cognitive maps.
Right.
So as we explore Feng's journey, it's really worth asking yourself, which mental highways are you currently stuck on? Where are the places your mind travels on complete autopilot?
Such a good question to keep in mind. So the setup of the essay is honestly so universally relatable. It starts on September 20, 2023. Feng and companion named Hui are traveling to a city called Kamloops in Canada.
Yeah.
It's about 230 kilometers away from their headquarters, and they're just heading there to complete a task, like nothing earth-shattering, just a standard daytime trip.
Right, just running an errand, basically.
Exactly. And because Feng had been to Kamloops several times before, he defaults to what, well, literally any of us would do in that situation. He chooses the familiar route. He hops onto Highway 97 to Highway 1, passing through these towns like 100 Mile House, Clinton, and Cache Creek.
And the essay is actually highly specific about the physical reality of that familiar route. It paints a pretty bleak picture, honestly.
Yeah, it sounds rough.
Oh, it does. From Cache Creek onwards to Kamloops, the landscape is just overwhelmingly defined by desolate mountains. There's very sparse human activity down in the valleys. I mean, Feng notes a few isolated farms, but they seem to be fighting a totally losing battle against the environment.
Right. He mentions they need massive sprinklers just to keep things alive, right?
Exactly. They rely heavily on these massive sprinkle irrigation systems just to cultivate grass. So the overriding sensation of the drive is this harsh desolation. And that's only slightly offset by a faint sense of vitality when they finally approach Kamloops Lake.
In this physical landscape, it immediately triggers a judgment in Feng's mind. He's standing on a hill overlooking the city of Kamloops, looking down at the settlement, and based entirely on that desolate, barren drive he just endured, he makes this massive, sweeping conclusion.
Oh, yeah.
He decides that the founders of this city must have been completely short-sighted. He's like, why on earth would anyone choose to establish a city in such a bleak, unforgiving terrain?
But, I mean, if you look at it purely through the data he had collected up to that exact point, it's a logical conclusion.
Right, from his perspective.
Yeah. He assumed that Highway 97 was a representative sample of the entire region. He looked at the desolate mountains and the struggling farms and just extrapolated that the whole area must share those exact same characteristics.
It's so funny because it's the equivalent of judging a massive, beautiful, multi-million-dollar architectural masterpiece solely by its muddy, unpaved driveway.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Like, imagine you drive up a rutted dirt path. You step out of your car covered in mud, and you immediately think, wow, the architect who built this estate has absolutely no idea what they're doing.
Right, because you completely miss the house itself. Your entire perception is colored by the miserable approach.
Exactly. And, how often do we do that in our daily lives? We make these sweeping, definitive judgments about a place, a person, or some highly complex situation based purely on our single familiar approach to it.
We do it constantly. And that really brings us to the crux of Xifeng's realization, because the very next day, the entire paradigm shifts completely. The journey back shatters the whole illusion of the muddy driveway.
Yes, the utopian detour. I love this part. Let's talk about September 21. So they finish their task and head back. But this time, instead of relying on habit and taking Highway 97, they just let their navigation system guide them.
The GPS takes the wheel.
Right. And it routes them in a drastically different direction. They start on Highway 5, running almost parallel to the Thompson River, and then they take a left turn at a place called Little Fort, merging onto Highway 24.
And the contrast is just absolute. It's immediate. The essay paints a really vivid picture of this return journey that feels, miles away from the desolate valleys of the previous day.
It's like a different planet.
It really is. Suddenly, they are in this densely populated, vibrant landscape. The hills are lush with winding, mature trees. The Thompson River itself is clear and serene, bordered by these beautiful pastoral views. Xifeng describes seeing herds of cattle and horses and houses nestled deeply into the greenery. He even mentions riverbanks that boast fine sand, almost resembling pristine beaches.
And the detail that really stuck out to me in the source material is the seasonal timing. It was mid-autumn, and Xifeng describes this high, incredibly clear sky. And for a stretch of 70 to 80 kilometers along Highway 24, the bushes and poplars had all turned.
Oh.
It had created this breathtaking, immersive golden avenue of autumn leaves. So he was looking around this lush, vibrant, golden world, and he's just floored. He says it felt like a replica of New Zealand. He even compares it to the utopian world of Taoyuan.
Right, and for listeners who might not be familiar with that reference, Tao Yunming was a classical Chinese poet who famously wrote about the peach blossom spring.
Right, the fable.
Yeah, it's a legendary fable about this hidden, ethereal utopia that's completely isolated from the outside world, where people live in perfect harmony with nature. So by invoking Tao Yunming, Xifeng is emphasizing just how idyllic and surreal this golden avenue felt compared to the barren rocks of Highway 97.
He actually literally exclaims, "Canada is truly beautiful," out loud in the car.
That's amazing.
And that right there, that's the pivotal aha moment. The realization hits him like a ton of bricks. That massive judgment he made yesterday, standing on the hill, calling the city's founders short-sighted, it had absolutely nothing to do with Kamloops.
No, it was entirely a reflection of his own ignorance. His whole worldview regarding the reality of that city was dictated by the specific road he had previously chosen. The desolation wasn't a universal truth of the region, it was merely a characteristic of Highway 97.
Right.
But because that was his only frame of reference, his mind just automatically conflated the part with the whole. He assumed his single data point was the entire universe.
And this is where the essay takes this really personal travel story and uses it to build a massive philosophical framework. Xifeng proposes that if we always live in the exact same place, if we only ever travel the exact same physical and mental routes, we inevitably begin to mistakenly believe that the whole world is an exact reflection of our own lives.
We mistake our localized, highly subjective experience for objective, universal reality. And the essay goes on to outline the profound dangers of this cognitive trap. Because fixed environments lead to fixed understanding. When our cognition shapes absolutely everything based on a single perspective, we lose all adaptability. We start forcing the complexities of the world to fit our narrow view rather than expanding our view to accommodate the world.
Yeah.
And Xifeng argues that this specific type of rigid thinking is the actual root cause of conflicts, contradictions, chaos, ignorance, backwardness, and even wars.
Okay, I actually want to push back on that jump from personal routine to global warfare for a second.
Sure.
Because when I hear that, part of me thinks, well, wait, isn't having a fixed perspective or a routine just a basic biological survival mechanism?
Mm-hmm.
Like, our brains physically cannot process the entirety of the world anew every single day.
No, they fry.
Right. If we had to constantly reevaluate every single route, every single belief, every single morning, we would be paralyzed by information overload. We need those cognitive shortcuts just to function, don't we?
Yeah.
It feels a little harsh to label a biological necessity as the root of ignorance and war.
Well, you are bringing up a very important distinction there between biological efficiency and epistemic arrogance.
Epistemic arrogance, I like that.
Yeah. From a cognitive psychology standpoint, the brain absolutely relies on heuristics, mental shortcuts to conserve energy. Routine is totally necessary for daily survival. However, Zhufeng's logic targets the mechanism of what happens when we forget those shortcuts are just shortcuts.
Oh, okay.
The danger is not in taking Highway 97. The danger lies in mistaking Highway 97 for the entire planet.
So it's the jump from this is my experience to this is the only experience.
Precisely. I mean, think about how massive societal conflicts actually ignite. When you have only ever driven one mental road, you believe it is the only road that fundamentally exists. So when someone from another background comes along and describes a completely different landscape, perhaps a golden avenue, you don't just think they have a different preference.
You think they're crazy?
You think they are factually wrong. Eventually, you might view their conflicting perspective as a deliberate lie or an existential threat to your reality, and that rigid perspective inevitably leads to dehumanization.
Wow.
So the fixed route isn't the problem. The loss of humility to admit that other roads exist is what scales up from personal ignorance to societal conflict.
That mechanism explains so much about how we interact today. And the essay actually takes this concept of Highway 97 versus Highway 5 and applies it directly to complex societal structures like religion, political systems, and cultural ethnicity. Zhufeng argues that if we immerse ourselves entirely in one ideology, we never understand the essence of others nor the merits and demerits of different systems.
Right. And it's really worth observing how Zhufeng handles these massive concepts here. He uses political systems and religious ideologies purely as structural metaphors.
Which is important to note, and just to be clear to you listening, we're not taking any sides here or endorsing any specific political or religious viewpoint. We're just exploring how the author is explaining the mechanism of echo chambers.
Exactly. He acts almost like a cognitive architect here, looking at the blueprint of a silo regardless of what is actually stored inside it. The essay is not interested in grading which political or religious system is correct. It's interested in the blindness that sets in when a group locks the doors from the inside and declares they possess the entirety of universal truth simply because they've never stepped outside.
Drawing conclusions from only one road means those conclusions will inherently lack universal values. And the essay claims that the more a specific group insists they are entirely right based on their single road, the worse their future actually becomes.
Right.
Because they're operating with this artificial blindness to the rest of the landscape.
They are essentially trying to navigate a complex, multidimensional world using a one-dimensional map. They cannot adapt to new challenges because their framework doesn't even allow for the existence of unknown variables.
This honestly feels tailor-made for the era of social media algorithms.
Oh, completely.
Like, our digital feeds are essentially doing this to us on an industrial scale. The algorithm figures out what we like, what triggers us, what we already agree with, and it just paves a digital Highway 97 just for us. It feeds us the exact same scenery, the exact same political outrage, the exact same cultural viewpoints every single day.
Over and over.
Yes, it actively hides the diverse, beautiful Highway 24s from us to keep us engaged on the familiar path. And over time, we look at our curated timeline and we genuinely think, this is the entire world. Everyone thinks like this. Anyone who disagrees must be fundamentally broken.
The algorithm is the ultimate enforcer of the fixed route. It literally monetizes the cognitive silo. And if we follow Zhufeng's essay to its ultimate conclusion, he takes this concept of isolated viewpoints and applies it to what you might call the final frontier of human cognition.
Oh.
The stark divide between the material world and the spiritual or soul worlds.
This is where the text gets incredibly profound, honestly. Zhufeng argues that this disconnect, this inability to see the other highway, is at its most extreme when you examine how purely materialistic thinkers view spiritual thinkers, and vice versa.
Right. The essay breaks down a mutual, almost tragic misunderstanding between these two realms of thought. So let's examine the first perspective. If someone's consciousness dwells entirely in the material world, Zhufeng posits that their thinking will be completely confined to commercial patterns and tangible assets.
Yep.
They measure the value of a life purely in terms of physical security, wealth accumulation, and tangible ROI, return on investment.
And because that is the only road they travel, They just cannot comprehend the mindset of people living in the spiritual or soul worlds.
Not at all.
Right. If a materialist watches someone abandon commercial advantage for an intangible goal like, say, inner peace or spiritual enlightenment, it doesn't just look like a different lifestyle choice. According to Swifeng, they view those spiritual seekers as incredibly foolish or even downright mad.
Because it defies the fundamental logic of their operating system. Throwing away tangible security for an invisible reward computes as literal madness if your entire reality is built on the physics of Highway 97.
Exactly. But Shifeng flips the lens, ensuring we see that the blindness works both ways. He notes that those who dwell entirely in the spiritual and soul worlds, the people who only travel that higher consciousness highway, they might look back down at the people obsessed with the material world and see them as no different from insects or animals.
It's a jarring metaphor, isn't it?
It really is.
But it illustrates the exact same cognitive trap from the opposite direction. From the purely spiritual highway, a life dedicated solely to accumulating physical objects, stressing over commerce, and chasing material power just looks primal. To the spiritualist, the materialist appears to be scurrying around, endlessly foraging for their next meal, completely devoid of higher meaning or transcendent purpose.
So you have these two massive groups of humanity just staring at each other across this divide. One side sees madness and foolishness, and the other side sees insects scurrying in the dirt.
And Xu Feng's core insight brings the entire essay together beautifully here. Neither side is objectively mad, and neither side is objectively insect-like.
Right.
These extreme dehumanizing judgments are simply massive cognitive biases. They are illusions born entirely from the fact that these two groups have never traveled on each other's highways.
The materialist hasn't taken the detour onto the spiritual Highway 24 to see the golden avenue of leaves. They haven't experienced that transcendent beauty that makes the spiritual pursuit worthwhile.
No.
And the spiritualist hasn't driven the material Highway 97 to understand the very real, practical survival mechanics and physical necessities that drive the material world. The judgment isn't based on objective truth. It's based entirely on isolation.
Exactly. The failure of understanding is really a failure of translation between two incompatible mental maps. And the only way to cure that failure is to willingly take the detour.
So, pulling all of this together, the core takeaway from Shuofeng's essay, Different Sceneries Along Different Roads, is as simple as it is profound. Our worldview, our empathy, and our understanding of reality are really only ever as broad as the roads we choose to travel.
That's so true.
Whether we're talking about a literal 230-kilometer drive through the Canadian autumn, the algorithms that dictate our political echo chambers, or the fundamental divide between how we value material wealth versus spiritual depth. If we insist on staying on our familiar routes, we are guaranteeing our own ignorance.
We're basically choosing to judge the world by the muddy driveway.
Exactly. But by actively choosing to step off those paths, physically, intellectually, and spiritually, we give ourselves the chance to discover these incredible golden avenues that have been waiting right next door the entire time.
It's a really powerful call to cognitive exploration. The essay asks us to constantly widen our perspective by seeking new roads. But, I think there is a fascinating way to push Shuofeng's metaphor just one step further. Yeah. We focus so much on finding the new roads to cure our ignorance. But what if the ultimate test of a widened perspective isn't just about finding new paths, but about how you return to the old ones?
Oh, that is an incredibly interesting angle. What do you mean by that?
Well, think about your own daily commute, the one we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive. If you were to drive your own desolate, familiar Highway 97 tomorrow morning, that same route you could navigate in your sleep. But this time, you drove it with the open, flexible, adaptable mindset of someone who has just experienced the lush beauty of Highway 24.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Would you see that old road differently? Would you suddenly notice hidden context, subtle beauty, or structural nuance that you had previously driven past 1,000 times without ever truly seeing? In other words, can a new mindset change an old road?
Wow, that is a brilliant thought to leave you with. The physical road might not change, but the driver absolutely can. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Shuofeng's journey. As you head out into your day, whether you are commuting to work, taking a walk, or just navigating your own internal thoughts, we hope you remember to challenge your own autopilot. Stay curious, question your certainties, and occasionally force yourself to take the scenic route.